"Leave him under the ice, or every one of us will regret it." Those words echoed across the frozen valley just as I watched the human ignore every warning we gave him. My name is Dr. Celine Vale, senior xenobiologist assigned to the Imperial Survey Fleet, and until that day, I believed every report claiming humans acted on reckless instinct. What happened next forced me to question everything our empire had ever taught us. The frozen lake stretched nearly half a mile across, its surface cracked into glittering plates after a violent winter storm. 11 enormous wolf-like predators already stood on the snow, soaked but alive, each one breathing slow clouds into the bitter air after being pulled from the freezing water by a single human named Logan Hayes. None of us understood how he had done it. Each creature weighed well over 1,000 pounds. Yet somehow he had rescued them one after another without asking for help, without demanding recognition, and without showing the slightest hint of panic. Our commander, Kale Vorik, stepped forward in polished black armor, raising one gloved hand toward Logan. "That is enough," he announced through external speakers. "The final creature remains beneath the ice for a reason." Logan never argued. He simply looked across the fractured surface until his eyes settled on a faint ripple beneath the frozen water. His expression changed from quiet satisfaction to calm determination. He tightened the straps on his weathered rescue jacket, checked the climbing rope around his waist, and walked toward the largest crack in the lake. Imperial drones immediately surrounded him, projecting bright warning symbols across the ice. Every scientific model predicted that another rescue attempt would collapse the remaining surface. Commander Vorik repeated his order. Logan continued walking. Around us, the 11 rescued wolves lifted their heads together. They were silent, but every one of them watched the human instead of us. I noticed something else that unsettled me even more. None of those predators behaved like frightened animals. They looked patient, almost as if they believed the outcome had already been decided. My instruments detected movement far below the ice, much larger than anything we had previously recorded. The buried heat signature exceeded every known member of the Frostfang species. Commander Vorik ordered his security team to intercept Logan before he reached the unstable section. For armored soldiers advanced with restraint devices designed to redirect civilians away from hazardous terrain. Logan did not challenge them with force. He studied their movements for only a moment, shifted his footing across the narrow bands of solid ice, and slipped between them with surprising precision before any restraint could close around him. The soldiers stumbled to regain balance, while Logan calmly reached the fractured edge. He secured one end of his rescue rope to an ancient stone outcrop, took one slow breath, and looked into the dark water below. For the first time that morning, I felt something our training manuals never prepared us to recognize. It was not fear of the frozen lake. It was fear that the human already understood something the rest of us had completely failed to see. Then, without another word, Logan disappeared beneath the ice while every rescued wolf fixed its eyes on the place where he vanished. The icy water swallowed Logan so completely that even our advanced scanners struggled to maintain a steady lock on his position, and for several long seconds the only sound across the frozen valley came from the wind sweeping over the cracked lake. Commander Kale Vorik immediately redirected every surveillance drone toward the point where the human had disappeared, confident that our technology would recover him before the unstable ice could become even more dangerous. Instead, the drones began transmitting conflicting readings. One moment, they displayed a single human descending through the freezing water, and the next they showed dozens of strange reflections bouncing between towering sheets of crystal ice beneath the surface. Our tactical specialists blamed interference, but I had spent years studying frozen ecosystems, and I knew those reflections were not random. Something massive was moving far below Logan, slowly enough to remain almost invisible while disturbing every layer of water around it. The commander ordered a pair of engineering drones to lower reinforced retrieval cables through the opening, hoping to pull Logan back whether he cooperated or not. The machines descended only a few yards before their cables tightened unexpectedly. Every operator assumed they had reached the human, yet the sensors reported no contact with his suit. Instead, the cables had become wrapped around an unknown metallic structure hidden beneath centuries of compacted ice. My heartbeat quickened as deeper scans finally penetrated the frozen layers. The object was artificial. It had been anchored there intentionally, long before our expedition arrived. Logan reached it moments later. Through the blurred underwater cameras, I watched him brush away thick layers of ice and reveal heavy restraint loops connected to reinforced alloy stakes. This was no natural trap created by shifting glaciers. Someone had deliberately secured an enormous creature beneath the lake. Commander Vorik immediately ordered everyone to classify the discovery, insisting the human be extracted before learning anything more. Logan ignored the flashing warning lights projected into the water. Instead of attempting to overpower the restraints, he examined every connection with patient precision, tracing each cable until he discovered the central locking mechanism buried beneath layers of frozen sediment. That single decision changed everything. Rather than pulling against thousands of pounds of reinforced alloy, he released the pressure holding the entire system together. One by one, the heavy restraints drifted loose, floating upward like forgotten relics. Our engineering drones attempted to reconnect the mechanism automatically, but Logan anticipated their movements. Using nothing more than the natural currents created by the rising cables, he guided the machines into harmless collisions with drifting ice fragments. Their navigation systems temporarily lost orientation, forcing them to retreat without ever touching him. Around me, even experienced officers fell silent. Nobody had expected a human to outthink equipment designed by the Empire's finest engineers, without damaging a single machine. Then every display across our command station flashed the same warning. The unidentified life form had begun moving freely. A tremendous shadow emerged from the darkness below, larger than any frostfang ever documented. Logan remained perfectly still as the enormous silhouette approached. Instead of fleeing, he slowly extended one open hand through the clear water. For one impossible moment, the giant predator stopped only a few feet away and simply looked at him. The creature neither charged nor retreated. It studied the human with calm, intelligent eyes unlike anything recorded in Imperial archives. Above the surface, the 11 rescued wolves rose together and turned toward the opening in the ice. None of them made a sound, yet every soldier instinctively stepped backward. Even Commander Vorik lowered his voice before speaking his next order, because for the first time since arriving on that frozen world, it no longer felt like we were observing wild animals. It felt as though something ancient had finally awakened, and somehow the first face it chose to trust belonged to a human. The immense shape drifted upward with such quiet control that every prediction generated by our tactical systems became meaningless within seconds. I had spent years cataloging the behavior of apex predators across dozens of frozen worlds, yet nothing prepared me for what unfolded beneath the thinning ice. Logan remained suspended in the freezing water, refusing to rush toward the surface even though his oxygen reserve had nearly reached its recommended limit. He watched the enormous creature with steady patience, and the creature returned the gesture with equal restraint. Then the giant wolf slowly turned its head toward the weakening ceiling of ice above them. Before any Imperial officer could issue another command, a broad sheet of frozen water separated naturally along existing fractures, allowing both Logan and the massive animal to emerge through the opening without creating the violent collapse our engineers had predicted. The first thing I noticed was the creature's extraordinary size. Standing on all four legs, its shoulders reached nearly 8 feet above the ice, and its silver coat shimmered beneath drifting snow as though every strand reflected the pale morning light. Its calm golden eyes never left Logan. Around the lake, the 11 rescued wolves lowered themselves onto the snow at exactly the same moment, not in fear, but in recognition. Commander Kale Vorik interpreted the gathering as the beginning of a coordinated attack. He ordered a containment team to establish a defensive perimeter using portable energy barriers intended to redirect large wildlife away from expedition personnel. The barriers rose with bright blue light, gradually forming a semicircle between Logan and the waiting transport vehicles. To everyone else's surprise, Logan did not step behind the protective field. Instead, he calmly walked toward the giant wolf, placing himself outside the defensive line while every Imperial soldier called for him to return. The enormous animal matched his pace with slow, measured steps until they stood only a few feet apart. Neither moved. Neither displayed any sign of hostility. The The frozen valley became so quiet that I could hear the distant sound of wind passing through the mountain ridges. Commander Vorik concluded that the human had lost all sense of caution. Determined to regain control, he ordered 2 automated capture drones to deploy restraint nets over the giant creature before it could approach any farther. The machines accelerated across the snow with perfect synchronization, but Logan reacted before they reached their target. He studied the terrain for only an instant, then signaled with one quick motion toward a narrow stretch of fractured ice. The giant wolf shifted exactly 2 steps to its left. The drones followed their programmed pursuit path without adjusting for the unstable surface beneath them. Their own momentum carried them onto thin ice, forcing their safety systems to halt the operation and activate emergency stabilization protocols. Without damaging a single machine, Logan had once again turned our own technology into its greatest limitation. Several officers exchanged uncertain glances. The commander lowered his scanner and stared directly at the human, though trying to understand how someone without advanced military equipment continued defeating carefully designed strategies through observation alone. Then something happened that erased every remaining assumption we held about the creature before us. The giant wolf lowered its enormous head until it rested only inches from Logan, closed its eyes for a brief moment, and gently touched the front of his weathered rescue glove with the tip of its nose. At that exact instant, the 11 wolves surrounding the frozen lake bowed together in complete silence. No recorded Frostfang behavior matched what I was witnessing. This was not instinct. This was acknowledgement. And while every Imperial officer struggled to comprehend the impossible display, Commander Vorik quietly whispered the words that sent a chill through every member of our expedition. "That is not following the human," he said. "It is recognizing him." Commander Kale Vorik did not raise his voice after witnessing the impossible gesture between the giant wolf and Logan. Instead, his silence unsettled every officer standing beside me far more than another command ever could. The commander slowly activated a compact control device attached to his armored wrist, and almost immediately a network of shimmering markers appeared across the frozen valley. Hidden stabilization anchors that our engineers had placed hours earlier began emerging through the snow, locking themselves into precise positions around the lake. It was not an attack. It was a containment pattern designed to isolate both the human and the wolves until additional Imperial forces could arrive. Logan noticed the glowing markers within seconds. He glanced across the valley only once before quietly studying the frozen ground beneath his boots. The giant wolf remained beside him without moving, while the other 11 animals continued waiting in complete silence. Their patience was becoming more unsettling than any display of aggression could have been. Commander Vorik finally spoke. He announced that the valley had entered a controlled scientific quarantine and instructed Logan to step away from the creatures immediately. Logan answered with the same calm tone he had used since the beginning of the rescue. He explained that surrounding frightened animals with unfamiliar technology would only increase unnecessary risk. Several officers dismissed his warning. Our containment system had never failed during previous expeditions. Moments later, the first anchor emitted a bright pulse across the snow. Instead of reaching the wolves, the energy reflected unexpectedly from a sheet of polished ice and spread through several neighboring anchors. One after another, the devices began interfering with each other until the entire containment pattern lost synchronization. Alarm indicators flashed across every command display. Engineering specialists hurried to restore the network, but each correction created another cascade of errors. Logan quietly pointed toward a shallow ridge running beneath the snow and said that the anchors had been placed across naturally shifting ice instead of stable rock. As temperatures continued dropping, the frozen surface was slowly moving beneath the equipment. Commander Vorik immediately rejected the explanation, insisting Imperial calculations were flawless. Before anyone could continue the discussion, a sharp cracking sound echoed across the valley. It did not come from the wolves. It came from directly beneath the nearest row of containment anchors. Thin fractures raced across the ice exactly where Logan had indicated only moments earlier. Automatic safety protocols immediately powered down every anchor to prevent structural damage, leaving the entire containment system inactive. No explosion occurred. No destruction followed. The Empire had simply been defeated by the frozen landscape it claimed to understand. I stared at Logan in disbelief. He had not sabotaged our equipment. He had merely recognized what we had overlooked. Around us, the wolves remained perfectly calm, almost as though they had expected the human to solve the problem before it became dangerous. Commander Vorik stepped forward alone, leaving his officers behind. For the first time since our expedition landed, he looked directly at Logan instead of the animals. He asked a single question. "How did you know?" Logan brushed a layer of frost from his gloves before answering. He said the ice had been speaking to anyone willing to pay attention. The wind had changed direction. The surface had settled unevenly, and tiny streams of trapped air beneath the snow revealed where the strongest foundation actually existed. None of those signs appeared on scanners because they required experience rather than algorithms. As I listened, an uncomfortable realization settled over me. The human was not succeeding because he possessed better technology than ours. He was succeeding because he observed details we had never considered important. At that moment, the giant wolf slowly lifted its head toward the surrounding mountains, and from distant ridges, faint answering calls drifted across the frozen wilderness. More wolves were coming, and every Imperial officer instinctively reached for equipment that suddenly seemed far less impressive than the quiet human standing alone in the snow. The distant calls rolling across the mountains grew louder with every passing second until they blended into one deep chorus that echoed through the entire valley. Every sensor on our expedition registered dozens of moving heat signatures descending from the surrounding ridges. Tactical officers immediately projected evacuation routes onto their visors, convinced an overwhelming predator migration was about to surround us. Commander Kale Vorik ordered every transport engine to remain active while defensive drones formed a protective circle around the research camp. I expected Logan to retreat toward our position once he realized more giant wolves were approaching. Instead, he quietly turned his attention toward the silver giant standing beside him. He placed one gloved hand against a nearby ice-covered boulder and slowly stepped backward, giving the creature room rather than attempting to direct it. That simple gesture puzzled me more than anything else I had witnessed. He behaved as though trust required distance instead of control. Minutes later, the first newcomers appeared through the falling snow. Massive wolf-like creatures emerged one after another from narrow mountain trails until the frozen valley seemed filled with silent silver shadows. Yet something immediately felt different from the terrifying scenario our tactical simulations had predicted. None of the arriving wolves rushed toward the camp. None displayed threatening behavior. Every single one walked with measured discipline until reaching the giant wolf beside Logan. Then, almost unbelievably, each animal lowered its head before looking toward the human. It spread through the valley like a carefully practiced ceremony. 10 became 20. 20 became 30. Soon dozens of enormous wolves stood across the frozen lake in complete silence, all facing Logan with unmistakable attention. No scientific report in Imperial history described predators organizing themselves with such remarkable restraint. Commander Vorik finally broke the silence. He insisted the behavior represented coordinated dominance and prepared to activate a long-range acoustic dispersal system designed to interrupt pack communication. Before technicians could power the equipment, Logan calmly raised one hand without looking back at us. The wolves remained perfectly still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Logan slowly lowered his hand again, and the enormous pack relaxed at the exact same moment. Several officers exchanged stunned expressions. No electronic signal connected them. No visible command had been given beyond a simple movement. Somehow the entire gathering understood him. Commander Vorik refused to accept what he had seen. Determined to prove the wolves were responding only to instinct, he walked several careful steps onto the open snow and repeated Logan's exact gesture. Nothing happened. The wolves barely acknowledged his presence before returning their attention to the human. The difference was impossible to ignore. Logan had never attempted to dominate them. He had earned something our authority could not manufacture. I quietly reviewed every recording from the previous hour, searching for a hidden explanation. Then I noticed a pattern no one else had mentioned. Logan never approached the wolves first after each rescue. He always waited for them to choose the distance between them. Every encounter had been built upon patience instead of force. That realization unsettled me because our empire had always believed leadership meant establishing control as quickly as possible. Logan demonstrated the opposite. At that moment, the giant silver wolf stepped onto a broad slab of untouched ice overlooking the entire valley. One by one, every other wolf turned toward the giant before shifting their gaze back to Logan. It looked less like a gathering of predators and more like a council acknowledging a respected guest. Commander Vorik slowly lowered the acoustic controller without activating it. Even he understood that interrupting this moment could destroy the only peaceful contact our civilization had ever achieved with these legendary creatures. As snow continued falling around the silent valley, I realized the greatest victory the human had achieved was not rescuing 12 extraordinary animals. It was accomplishing something our advanced empire had never considered possible. He had convinced an entire pack that trust was stronger than fear. The silence that settled over the valley did not last long because the giant silver wolf finally moved again, not toward the mountains or the frozen lake, but directly toward Logan with slow, deliberate confidence. Every imperial scanner immediately switched into high alert, predicting an imminent dominance display based on thousands of encounters with large predators across explored space. I believed the same prediction until I noticed Logan standing completely still. He did not reach for equipment. He did not retreat. He simply watched the enormous creature approach with the same calm expression he had carried since the beginning of the rescue. Commander Kale Vorik quietly ordered every soldier to remain in position but prepare emergency intervention if necessary. None of us understood that the greatest test of the day was about to begin. The giant wolf stopped only a few feet from Logan before beginning a slow circle around him. Its massive paws pressed deep impressions into the fresh snow, while its golden eyes carefully observed every movement the human made. Logan never attempted to follow the creature with his gaze. Instead, he continued, looking toward the open valley, allowing the wolf complete freedom to inspect him from every angle. I recognized the behavior immediately. Many intelligent species performed similar evaluations before accepting strangers into protected territory. What surprised me was not the wolf's behavior. It was the human's understanding of it. Logan instinctively avoided every action that could be interpreted as a challenge. Several officers whispered that he appeared unusually passive, but I began to realize he was demonstrating remarkable confidence instead. Someone afraid always feels compelled to prove something. Logan never did. The inspection continued for several long moments before the giant wolf lifted its head toward the gray winter sky and released a single deep call that rolled across the mountains like distant thunder. Every wolf in the valley immediately stood at attention. Then something extraordinary happened. One after another, the wolves calmly separated into two long lines stretching across the snow, leaving a wide path leading directly toward Logan. No command from the Empire had ever produced such flawless coordination. Commander Vorik stared at the formation in complete disbelief. He quietly admitted that none of the behavioral records stored within Imperial archives had ever documented this response. Logan looked around the valley with genuine curiosity rather than triumph. He slowly walked forward through the center of the path without hesitation. As he passed, every giant wolf lowered its head in silent acknowledgement. Not one stepped into his way. Not one attempted to touch him. It was not submission. It was respect freely given. My analytical training urged me to search for hidden explanations, but every possible theory collapsed beneath direct observation. There were no chemical signals, no visible communication devices, and no environmental triggers capable of coordinating dozens of apex predators so precisely. The only constant variable was the human himself. Commander Vorik finally lowered his helmet's tactical display and walked toward Logan without any escort. His posture had changed noticeably. The confidence of command had been replaced by cautious curiosity. He asked Logan whether he had encountered these creatures before arriving on the planet. Logan smiled faintly and answered that this was his first meeting with any of them. He explained that frightened living beings often respond to patience more quickly than authority because trust cannot be demanded. It can only be offered until it is returned. Those simple words struck me harder than any scientific discovery I had made during my entire career. For years, our empire had attempted to understand dangerous worlds by controlling them. This human had achieved more in a single morning simply by choosing to understand before acting. As fresh snow drifted across the valley, the giant silver wolf turned toward the distant mountains and paused beside Logan, waiting without urgency, almost as though inviting him to witness something even greater that still remained hidden beyond the frozen horizon. The giant silver wolf waited at the edge of the valley with quiet patience, and Logan accepted the unspoken invitation without asking a single question. Every Imperial officer expected the human to hesitate before following an unknown apex predator into unexplored territory, yet he adjusted the straps on his rescue pack and began walking across the untouched snow as naturally as though he were following an old friend along a familiar trail. Commander Kale Vorik immediately ordered a reconnaissance team to shadow the movement from a safe distance while I accompanied the expedition with portable scanning equipment. None of us wanted to interrupt what was unfolding, but none of us could ignore it either. The procession climbed gradually toward a broad ridge overlooking the frozen basin we had occupied all morning. As we reached higher ground, the landscape opened into a breathtaking panorama of icy cliffs, winding glaciers, and snow-covered forests stretching for miles beneath pale winter sunlight. Then every display in my scanner suddenly illuminated with alerts unlike anything I had ever recorded. Hidden beneath layers of ancient ice were enormous energy signatures arranged in concentric formations extending far beyond the visible horizon. At first we assumed they represented unusual mineral deposits. Logan quietly knelt beside a weathered stone partly buried beneath drifting snow and brushed away centuries of accumulated frost. Beneath the ice appeared carefully carved symbols unlike any known Imperial language. The giant silver wolf stood silently beside the stone, watching Logan instead of the rest of us. Commander Vorik approached cautiously and activated his universal translation system. The device failed repeatedly before displaying one simple conclusion. The markings were older than every civilization stored within Imperial historical archives. I watched Logan study the carvings for several moments before tracing one shallow groove with his gloved hand. As he did, dozens of matching symbols hidden throughout the surrounding ridge gradually became visible beneath the melting frost, reflecting soft blue light across the valley below. No machinery activated. No weapons emerged. It felt as though the mountain itself had been waiting for someone willing to notice what everyone else had overlooked. The wolves quietly gathered around the illuminated stones, each taking a respectful position without blocking Logan's view. Commander Vorik whispered that we might be standing inside an ancient ceremonial site. I almost dismissed the idea until my scanner completed its structural analysis. The carved stones formed an immense circular pattern surrounding the entire valley. This had never been a random habitat. It had been a sanctuary deliberately constructed by an unknown civilization long before our arrival. The realization transformed everything we believed about the wolves. They were not merely surviving here. They had been protecting this place for generations beyond calculation. Logan slowly stood and looked toward the giant silver wolf. Without speaking, the creature walked to the center of the circle and rested one massive paw upon a flat stone unlike the others. A brilliant column of pale light rose gently into the winter sky, carrying no heat, producing no shockwave, only illuminating countless additional carvings scattered across distant cliffs. Every wolf lowered its head simultaneously. My scanner immediately identified a remarkable biological response. Every member of the pack shared nearly identical genetic markers pointing toward one extraordinary individual. The giant silver wolf was not simply the strongest among them. It was the original lineage from which the entire population had descended. Commander Vorik stared at the data for several silent moments before removing his helmet completely, something I had never seen him do during an active mission. He looked first at the ancient sanctuary, then at Logan, and finally at the majestic creature standing peacefully beside the human. His voice became almost a whisper as he spoke the conclusion none of us had imagined possible. The final wolf rescued from the frozen lake was not merely an important member of the pack. It was the Alpha King whose survival had preserved the legacy of an entire world, and the first outsider it had chosen to trust was a human from Earth. The revelation spread through our expedition faster than any emergency alert we had ever received, yet no one reached for a weapon or issued another command. Even the endless wind sweeping across the mountain sanctuary seemed quieter, as though the frozen world itself had been waiting for this forgotten truth to return. Commander Kale Vorik remained motionless before the illuminated stone circle, studying the Alpha King with an expression I had never witnessed on the face of an imperial officer. It was not fear. It was humility. Logan, however, reacted very differently. He did not celebrate the discovery or seek recognition for rescuing the most important creature on the planet. Instead, he slowly stepped away from the center of the sanctuary and gave the Alpha King the space that rightfully belonged to its own world. That simple decision changed everything once again. The Alpha King turned toward Logan instead of the ancient monument and gently lowered its head. Immediately, every wolf throughout the sanctuary mirrored the same movement. The synchronized gesture lasted only a few seconds, yet every scanner confirmed an extraordinary phenomenon unfolding across the valley. The glowing symbols carved into the surrounding cliffs began shining brighter, releasing waves of pale light that spread across the frozen landscape without producing heat or energy capable of harming anything nearby. My instruments identified the pulses as biological synchronization rather than technology. The sanctuary was responding to the presence of the Alpha King, but somehow Logan's rescue had restored the sequence necessary for the ancient system to awaken. As the light reached the distant glaciers, concealed pathways emerged beneath centuries of accumulated snow. Hidden freshwater channels began flowing beneath transparent layers of ice, reconnecting isolated sections of the valley into one living ecosystem. Environmental monitors displayed rising oxygen levels, healthier vegetation beneath the snowpack, and countless dormant microorganisms returning to activity after what appeared to be an impossibly long period of silence. Commander Vorik quietly removed the authorization chip from his command console and canceled every remaining containment directive. The order surprised every member of the expedition because Imperial protocol required securing newly discovered strategic sites. Yet the commander no longer viewed the sanctuary as a resource waiting to be claimed. He finally understood that it was a living heritage deserving protection rather than control. Some officers hesitated, uncertain whether abandoning the original mission violated regulations, but Logan answered the uncertainty without criticizing anyone. He simply pointed toward the valleys now glowing with renewed life and said that the best proof of successful exploration was leaving a place healthier than it had been before people arrived. No lecture followed. No dramatic speech. The evidence surrounded us in every direction. The Alpha King slowly walked toward one of the newly revealed streams and drank from the clear water before looking back at Logan. The human smiled quietly, then checked the worn rescue rope still hanging from his pack as though preparing to continue ordinary work instead of standing inside one of the greatest scientific discoveries in recorded history. That ordinary gesture affected me more deeply than the awakening sanctuary itself. Logan never behaved like someone who believed he had changed history. He acted like a rescue worker who had simply completed another responsibility. Commander Vorik approached him with measured respect and extended one armored hand. Logan accepted the greeting without hesitation. No victory had been declared between human and alien, yet everyone present understood what had truly happened. The Empire had arrived believing superior equipment and authority guaranteed success. One human had quietly defeated that assumption through observation, compassion, and disciplined judgment. As I watched fresh sunlight reflect across the restored sanctuary, I realized our greatest discovery was not the Alpha King, the ancient monument, or the hidden ecosystem. It was the uncomfortable truth that the smallest member of our expedition had demonstrated the greatest strength, and he had done so without trying to conquer anything at all. The morning our transport finally prepared to leave the frozen world, nothing about the landscape resembled the place where we had first arrived. Clear streams now wound quietly through fields of untouched snow. Distant cliffs shimmered with ancient symbols visible beneath the winter sunlight, and the entire valley carried a calm that none of our scientific models had predicted. Commander Kale Vorik gathered every member of the expedition before departure and issued a final revision to the official mission record. The sanctuary would receive the highest level of planetary protection recognized by the Empire. No mining operations, military installations, or biological extraction programs would ever be authorized within its boundaries. Several officers appeared surprised that such an extraordinary decision had been made after only a single expedition, but no one questioned the order. We had all witnessed enough to understand that some discoveries were too important to measure by strategic value alone. Logan quietly packed the last of his rescue equipment without asking for recognition or requesting transportation priority. He inspected every rope, secured every tool, and carefully stored the same weathered gloves that had pulled 12 lives from freezing water. Watching him, I realized something that every Imperial report had overlooked for generations. Humans did not become remarkable because they sought impossible challenges. They became remarkable because ordinary acts of responsibility remained extraordinary even after success. Before boarding our transport, Logan turned one final time toward the sanctuary. The Alpha King stood on a distant ridge overlooking the valley, surrounded by the silent pack. There was no dramatic farewell, no attempt to follow the human, and no effort to prevent his departure. Instead, the Alpha King lifted its head toward the bright winter sky. One by one, every wolf throughout the valley answered with a calm, unified call that rolled across the mountains like a promise remembered rather than spoken. The sound followed us all the way to the landing zone. Commander Vorik removed the insignia from his formal command cloak and quietly handed it to Logan. The human looked surprised and respectfully declined the gesture, explaining that he had only done the job he believed anyone should do. The commander smiled for the first time since our mission began and returned the insignia to his own uniform. He replied that perhaps the Empire had spent too many centuries rewarding power while forgetting to recognize character. No one argued with him. As our transport lifted above the valley, I looked through the observation window until the sanctuary disappeared beneath drifting clouds. My research notes contained thousands of measurements, biological scans, geological surveys, and environmental recordings, yet none of them captured the lesson I intended to submit with my final report. The greatest mistake our civilization had made was believing intelligence existed to dominate unfamiliar worlds. Logan had demonstrated that true intelligence began with the willingness to observe before judging, to understand before controlling, and to protect before claiming ownership. The Alpha King had not entrusted the future of an ancient sanctuary to the strongest army or the most advanced technology. It had trusted the one individual who expected nothing in return for doing the right thing. Years later, every cadet entering the Imperial Exploration Academy would study the Frozen Valley Accord, not as a story about extraordinary wolves or forgotten civilizations, but as the moment an entire empire changed its understanding of humanity. We once believed humans survived because they were stubborn. We later believed they succeeded because they adapted faster than anyone else. Both ideas were incomplete. The truth was far simpler and far more difficult to imitate. Humans possessed a rare strength that could not be manufactured, purchased, or programmed. When every logical calculation demanded caution, they still found the courage to choose compassion first. On that frozen world, the Empire discovered an ancient sanctuary. I discovered something far greater. We had never been studying the humans. They had been quietly teaching us all along.